Hola, bienvenidos, bienvenidas a esta nueva edición del Foro, de la Caravana de Mujeres. Bueno, recordaros que esta emisión la estamos transmitiendo por YouTube, pero también por Zoom. Es importante que si queréis participar en el turno de preguntas, si queréis escuchar la traducción simultánea, os suscribáis a través de Zoom en el enlace que tenéis en YouTube para poderos conectar a la conversación. Para toda la gente que esté escuchando ahora mismo la conversación, que sepáis que en la parte de abajo aparece un icono con un globo terráqueo y desde ese botón podéis escuchar la traducción simultánea cuando nuestros invitados hablen en inglés. Así que sin más que decir, Carlos, por favor, adelante.
Bueno, pues simplemente algo breve para daros la bienvenida al segundo día de ponencia de las directoras de la 9ª Caravana de Cine realizado por Mujeres de Bilbao. Como bien decíamos ayer, bueno, que el cine, y yo creo que coincidíamos varias de las personas, el cine pensamos, nosotros desde KCD pensamos que tiene que ser algo presencial, que es bueno verlo en grupo y por estas extrañas circunstancias que nos están tocando vivir, lo tenemos que ver así, el de lejos, online. Para nosotros, Myriam sería un placer tenerte en Bilbao. Ya vendrás, ya nos conoceremos en Bilbao. Yo te vi en el Cairo en el 2019, cuando estabas tú preparando tu película. Bueno, pues nos tenemos que conformar con lo que hay y en este momento la tecnología nos sirve para por lo menos poder charlar aunque sea en la distancia. Bienvenida a este Bilbao virtual. Bienvenidas, Asha, que hacía tiempo que no te veía también. La última vez te vi en Bilbao también. Bienvenida a Bilbao, a este Bilbao virtual, y a Mal, por supuesto, nuestra compañera Mal, de caravanas y de otros caminos. Bienvenida otra vez al segundo día de la caravana. Hay yo no sé si el público va a tener muchas preguntas. Yo sí tengo muchas preguntas para ti. Me interesa mucho cómo una joven de origen argelino como tú se ha puesto a rascar en la historia. Y yo comentaba ayer también que no podemos entender el presente y el futuro si no miramos hacia atrás. Y creo que esa mirada tuya hacia atrás es muy importante. Argelia sufrió un conflicto muy grave. Es muy curioso porque yo buscando datos sobre Argelia me he encontrado que 3 años después de acabar la guerra con Francia todavía se hacían pruebas nucleares por parte del gobierno francés en Argelia. Se hicieron 18, en total creo que fueron unas 18 pruebas nucleares. Hubo mucha gente desaparecida en el conflicto y mucha gente que todavía se veía afectada después del conflicto por esas pruebas, ¿no? Así que espero que nos descubras muchas cosas sobre esos secretos argelinos y franceses que están por ahí. Sin más, animaros a preguntar, a preguntar de una manera presencial. Es bueno, esto es como en el cole, que nadie quería salir a la pizarra el primero o la primera, pero sí es bueno, sobre todo para las personas que van a responder a las preguntas, pues yo creo que es bonito también ver la cara de la gente que pregunta, ¿no? Tenemos por delante cerca de 1 hora, aprovechémosla, disfrutémosla, y nada, aquí damos comienzo al segundo día de la 9ª caravana.
Una cosita antes, perdón, antes de comenzar, sí quería recordar, como decía Carlos, de cara a hacer este turno de preguntas, habrá una conversación de en torno a 1 hora. Durante un turno de entrevista, digamos, de media hora. Durante ese turno podéis ir mandando vuestras preguntas. En el iconito de abajo veis que podéis mandar, tenéis un icono de preguntas, las podéis mandar por ahí y a partir de la media hora se dará paso, como comenta Carlos, a que os vayáis conectando si queréis para trasladar vuestras preguntas en directo y preguntarle directamente a Myriam. Así que os animamos y os invitamos a ello. Muchas gracias.
Hola a todas, hola a todos. Hello everyone. I'm so happy to have here Myriam for the first time after you finished your film. We can screen it finally. And also we have Azza Shabouni from Tunis. So Azza is an editor, professor in the university. Myriam Dorothée is the filmmaker, the responsible of this beautiful film. And it was really great to watch it finally because 2 years ago or 3 years ago now. 2 years ago, in
Yes.
2019, or yeah, right? It was 2019 or 18.
18, I think.
The years are passing.
Yeah. Yeah.
In 2000, no, 18. In 2018, we had a workshop, the rough cut workshop in Cairo. And Myriam was invited to screen her rough cut in the workshop. It was still in the process of the post-production. Azza Shabouni was in the jury member, who's a jury member in the workshop, and Myriam was the winner of the of the workshop. And I hope that this very small support helped you in finishing your film.
Yeah,
So we're
very
really
much.
happy to be all the three of us here. It's great, and I would invite Azza to make the first question, and we can continue later. Okay?
Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Amal, for inviting me to share this beautiful moment. I'm very, very moved and honored. It's a long journey. I think it was been a long, long journey for you, Dorothée, Myriam. And my first question is, what was the starting point of this cinematic journey? Because I know the answer, but I think that the audience would like to know.
Actually, I think the starting point of this cinematic journey was my birth, you know. No, to be more, I think, accurate. I mean, since I was a child, I was very much, I would say, curious about my father past. He's Algerian, a filmmaker, exiled in France, and I was very much silent about his past. And I think very early on, I started, studying the Arabic language. And actually, I lived in Egypt and then in Palestine. And it took me a very long time to get closer to the history of Algeria, and through the history of Algeria to the history of my father. So it took me, for example, few years just to have access to a film script that he had offered to me, which is called Letter to My Daughters. He wrote it when he was in France and I was in Palestine. And I think he understood at that point that going through a military occupation in Palestine, I could very well receive a history of occupation by the French powers and army in Algeria. And I think I needed to take a very long detour to have access to the complexity and the intimacy of my father's history, and through his history of his village, and beyond that through a country. Yeah, it's been an interesting and long journey, but I managed to make the film after about 7 years of research and visiting the country with my father. He had not returned for the past 50 years. So for him, it was very emotional. So it also took him a very long time to process the idea of me filming him through this journey. And then I had no experience as a filmmaker, and very much wanted to make a professional film. So I also had, it took me a long time also to train myself, know how to write a documentary script and how to think cinematically, and not only as a writer or as a journalist, but really through images and emotion through images.
And sound. But why did you choose to make a film? Why not writing a book? Or
I'm actually now starting to write a book. But I think, if I think there is this idea of inheriting history, and part of my heritage I found out was cinema. But sometimes you make decision, you're not even aware of why you're taking this path. I understood after the meaning of cinema to my father, and that could be obviously anyone outside, because of course he's a filmmaker, is in exile, trying to make a film, not being able to tell his own story, telling the story with his daughter, hoping the daughter will make something out of it. And I think I felt unconsciously a responsibility to make a film and claim some kind of heritage in terms of history, memory, language, and also cinema. So there was very much this idea of filiation and honoring in a way also what he tried to pass on to me, and was not necessarily able to pass on to me in exile, and with the trauma also of the war. So yeah, no, I'm actually after all these years and having go through this journey, I feel the need to write about the process also. In this way, help me also work on the very hard experience of when you start excavating memories that are very traumatic and very, very, very heavy. You yourself end up being a bit traumatized, so you also need to process yourself of verbalizing what you've experienced emotionally for all these years, and what you carry on your shoulders also as a responsibility to tell the history and the stories of all these people who were displaced and enclosed and couldn't tell their internal exile. So
I would, I would like to ask you about your relation with your father in the process of the film,
yes.
because I guess it's not easy to make a film with somebody which is very, very near to us, and also to trying to recover a historical memory that maybe also sometimes he didn't want to talk about it. Okay, so it's a relation with the father, but also with someone who didn't want during many years to remember.
Yes.
So how was this kind of relation? How did you manage to create like I don't know, like a way to deal with him as a
Yes.
father, as a character of the film, but
Yes.
also as someone who didn't want to remember?
Yeah, it was a very long process. In the beginning, it didn't want to be filmed. So I was only like carrying a small camera, and these are the first images in the film. At this point, I really had no training in filmmaking, so the images are shaky, but they are telling of a desire to film. So what happened is that I was just trying to film, and when I was asking him questions, he would behave as a journalist. Like he would tell me stories as if he was on a war zone, but not experiencing himself the events. He was very distant from the events. So there was no emotion. And that didn't help me understand, because I think to understand the impact of the history, you need to go intimately, you need to go really deep into the emotions. And so I was very confused, because at some point I was like, maybe this history is not that important after all. But no, it was a way to protect himself, and especially in front of his daughter. It was very hard for him to not hide his emotions. So it took me some time, also that he could understand that I was like a grown-up, I was an adult, and he could talk to me in an equal way. Like he was not just my father. He was an adult. I was an adult, and I could understand, and I could relate, and I could feel. I think that's the most important part in documentary filmmaking, is how you feel the other person, and that opens something, even if you're not aware of that. And just through, I think, empathy, but it's unconscious. It's just because you love the person, so you're there to listen to the person, and something opens. And I think I very much loved all these characters, in the film, like all these witnesses of the history. they were beautiful to me. They were very dignified, and I think that I love the place, and I think the love also was a very important part of the process to make the film, and actually be able to face all the obstacles and the difficulties in making a film. And of course, at some point, you know, I realized it was too heavy on my shoulders. I wondered if I could repair, you know, as a child, I think you have this idea that you can, you know, maybe you see the wounds of your parents, and you want to to heal the ones, you know, and at some point it was hard, because I felt also myself hurt by this history, and also the fact that it was denied, and the silence was another form of violence to me, and it was actually silence in Algeria in the official history, and also in France. And in France, of course, I could understand better, because there is the weight of guilt, and it's still a very hard history to face, and the consequences of this history. But I was also very surprised by the fact that in Algeria it was also silenced, and that you know, and I actually, this is how at some point I decided to make the film. It was like to preserve the silence of the place and the silence of these people, because I could have put a voiceover everywhere, my voiceover or my father voiceover, but I think it was very much more telling to let silence speak in this place, because this was a very strong sensation I had, silence everywhere, you know. Yes.
Yes, and how about the work in editing? Because this work on emotion and silence is very, very clear. So how did it work? Because I remember in 2018 we saw a 90 minutes version, and the final one is 62 minutes. How did you manage to also to find the right balance with between the personal, your father, the daughter, father quest of memory, and also the testimony of and also the poetry, the women saying poetry, and the music, and the silence of the place, and
yes. Yeah, it was very hard, you know, when you have really rich material from your shooting. You really want to have a longer film, and because I worked as a researcher before, I was trained in history. I was very much attached to details, to archives, to you know, testimonies, actually, you know, using this testimony as a way to almost cross-check testimonies, really to prove this person was saying that and this other person was saying that, and so at the end truth could be there and not disputed. And at some point I realized by screening the film that people were a bit I would say in the longer version they thought that there was some repetition that worked almost like as a way to tell and retell the same idea. And at some point, I realized with my editor, Mélanie Bro, that I had to trust also the strengths of each testimony and not try to actually write an historical essay, but really, you know, give them space and believe that their testimony is rich and strong enough to convey emotion, to convey history, and not necessarily because in the very first script I had written, very beginning of the process, I had French soldiers testifying, I had French generals testifying, I had archives, reports, Algerians, my father. At some point, I even brought my mother, who who was finding out about this history, my sister. So at some point I was like, okay, we have to make it simple, because really it's like hitting the nerve. And at some point you don't need to have too many layers. It's also about bringing to the fore, like really the core of it. And so that's why at the end it got shorter.
Yeah, but I think it doesn't have to, for me, it didn't have to do with the duration, but I felt like their testimony, or the testimony especially of your father, has the same credibility of any other archive. And this is a strong thing of the film, that you don't need to prove something which happened and which was hidden. They, when they tell, they always they tell the truth, because you can feel this emotions, and I think that's very good that we start to recover also the oral memory, because the archive, we don't, not always we have access to the archive, and the oral memory of our fathers, our parents, our grandparents are as much as important to this kind of archive. So I think that it was something very strong about your film, that you didn't try to prove what happened. It was their story, and we believe it, you know. Yeah. And also I have a question about the identity in the film, because you have a double identity. You are French Algerian. Your mother is French, your father is Algerian. So in a way, your place in the film, or your place maybe with yourself, also is complicated. Your father is the victim, and your mother belongs to the colony, yeah, in a way. So how did you deal with yourself, with this kind of double identity in the film? Yeah,
I think that's I mean, I think that was the point of departure of the whole process, like feeling really very much at the on the frontier. You have to actually, I think it helped me at the end, because when I screened the film in France to a French audience, people could listen. They weren't how you say, they didn't feel like any form of accusation. And I think also because I always had my mother in mind somewhere, who was very sensitive, about how I would talk about this history now that I had found out. And so I think I was really trying to create a dialogue, and through that, even 60 years after, a form of reconciliation, because I think it goes through our generation that really is dealing with the consequences and unconscious, untold, and it's heavy on our shoulders, and I think growing up as a French Algerian, not knowing much about my father's past, I think it gave me strength to go deeper into this history, because I had a lot of innocence. I had no clue about the violence, the crimes, and I was very shocked. I was very traumatized. And I had vertigo, and of course, I think I understood at the end of the process why my father would not talk about it, because of course he wanted to protect me and protect his daughters, and I didn't want to bring a bone of contention within the family, because once you bring this war and this past, it's very divisive. So I understand. So now it's really about taking advantage of this position, in betweenness, and to actually create a true dialogue, because it's within me, it's I need it personally. So I think it's not just formal and beautiful ideas of dialogue and reconciliation. It's like also a way to remain sane, and and in unity and harmony with the two parts as much as possible, if possible. So yes, that was also part of the process. And I think the beautiful part, you know, when actually we screened the film at the institute. I don't know if you can hear.
I think there is a problem with the sound, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Is it better? Yes. So I was going to say, I think the beautiful part in this process was at the end, we had a screening at the Institute of the Arab World. And the family of my father was there and the family of my mother was there, and they had never met. And they met through the film. And it was symbolic because in the audience, you had French audience, you had Algerian audience, you had a lot of mixity, you had a lot of people actually telling their stories, and it was very emotional. And so yeah, I mean, it's an interesting but hard place to be in, and I hope to go deeper into this question in the future.
So yes, what are your
we didn't hear you.
no, what are you continuing with this subject? Are you
Yeah, I think I'm you know, it's hard to I think stop there, you know. When you start digging into history, you find ghosts and they start haunting you, and they are there, and they follow you, and you have to face them. And that's the whole point with I think the statue at the beginning of the film, that was on the way from my father's village to Algiers, and then was taken back to France and erected in Nancy, where he lives. And one day he faced the statue, and I think it's really the role of our generation to face all these statues and all these ghosts. And I don't think one film will tell all the stories that we have within ourselves. So yeah, I would like to tell you one film and that's enough, but no, I think there is more. There is responsibility, there is a necessity. So yes, I should be around.
And how's your father after going with you through this journey?
Yeah, he's very fine. He's very proud. He's actually is screening the film when I'm not able to screen the film, answers questions, and now he's very much at ease with telling his story. And I think that's the most beautiful part, you know, when in any context he is not ashamed anymore to share, and actually find that it's worthy of attention. And yeah, it's very much about finding dignity. And I think it was the whole process, you know, trying to give back dignity to these people through the film, through telling the story, and most of all through respect and love. And I think it really worked, because in the village they are also proud of the film. The characters of the film, the witnesses, they feel relieved in a way, you know, that the film exists, that these archives exist, and yes, they encourage me to do more and are willing to help. So yes.
I have one last question before we open it for the audience. I don't know if Azza, do you have any other questions before we open the discussion? I have one question. I know that you went back to, not back, you went to live in to Algeria for the first time, right?
Yes.
If the film has to do with this decision to go to live in Algeria.
Yes, you know, at some point, I think it was really also about. So I understood my father's story, and I understood the village story, and through the village also part of Algerian history. And I needed to in a way, emancipate myself from the family history and discover more about Algeria and have my own experience without mediation. And I actually went to also record a sound documentary that will be 2 hours long and will be broadcasted on the French radio France Culture about the very history of mass resettlement during the war and the consequences of this loss of historical identity of the rural areas. So I'm like, it was very great to actually find myself, you know, like traveling and meeting writers who have been working on the same topic, or young people demonstrating and very much questioning the history and willing to really get out of the official history and the image that that was forced on them of the past. So I felt in a way that we were meeting, you know, like we that did not grow up in the same country, but being there, we had the same question, we had the same needs, the same desire for truth, and so yeah, it was a very moving experience. Yes.
Thank you very much. Now I would invite our audience who's hearing us, watching us, and we don't see anybody. I would like to invite the audience to ask something if they want, or to send their questions.
Y por el momento nadie nos ha escrito todavía ninguna pregunta. Estáis invitados a hacerlo por el iconito de preguntas. Y también, bueno, vemos por aquí que Ainhoa Pérez Arróspide nos quiere hacer una pregunta. Así que, Ainhoa, voy a conectarte. Verás que se te desconecta la sesión, pero automáticamente se te va a conectar de nuevo para entrar en nuestra conversación, ¿vale? Muy bien. Vamos con ello. Y ahora enseguida veremos a Ainhoa disponible para poder hacer la pregunta. Tendrá que conectar su micrófono y su cámara para poder hacer la pregunta. Hola, Ainhoa, muy buenas.
Hola, buenas. Hello, everyone. Myriam, thank you very much for your film. I think it's very brave, all the process that you have done, because not only for you and your father, but I guess that even all the people that talk in the film, the fact of talking about it was also a healing, a hard, but maybe healing process. So I think it was very brave. My question is related to this silence, no, in the history. On the side of France, you have already mentioned that there is the guilt, I guess. So on this side, my question is how the people in France are receiving this film. Like, are they interested, or how are you feeling that the people receive the film? And on the other side, regarding the silence in Algeria, in the country of Algeria and the people of Algeria, why do you think? Is it because of the traumas you have mentioned, the need to protect themselves, or what is your feeling on this regard?
Thank you so much for your question. So I think, you know, like, for France, I think, of course, there's this feeling of guilt, but also the laws, the amnesty laws that was put in place after the war, and prevent, you know, any prosecution of war criminal. So that, in a way, prevent us from knowing the truth, you know, and so of course there is also the question of archives and the access to archives. And for 50 years in France, most of the archives on the Algerian war were closed to the public. So as a historian, you could have authorization, but I think this question was also key in creating and maintaining a silence. I think now we're reaching a stage where the war generation is dying, and that's also why we very much need to record these testimonies. But I think with that, there is more eagerness to open these questions, even though in France it's still a very sensitive question. And when I started working on the film and meeting producers and funders in France, they were very like surprised that someone like me could come and meet them and ask questions about what they call the very old history, 50 years ago, you know, and they would ask me to move on, you know, and focus on the present, without seeing the connection between the past and the present and the need for us, the young generation, to know. For Algeria, I was very surprised as well, but I understood through my own research and questions that the official history is actually erasing the role of very much the civilians in a way. You really have this idea of one people behind the fighters, and so it's a very glorious image of the revolution, you know, fighting against and winning over the French power. And actually this idea of women and children in camps is a very weakening narrative for the young state, you know, building itself. And so that's also a reason, you know, the official history had not very much taken into consideration this not very glorifying part of the history. Also, I think, you know, because it affected mostly the rural areas, and very few memoirs had been written about, you know, you have many memoirs from fighters, for example, but who is the displaced young child actually writing his memoir? It's very recent that there is actually a journalist in France who is no French Algerian, who wrote a very beautiful book about this forced displacement and resettlement. But yeah, it's I think there is also, from what I understood, a feeling of guilt, like, you know, why were we displaced, like feeling of shame, of you know, when you're one day very suddenly displaced from your ancestors village and lands, and everything behind you is in ruins. It's very hard to remember and tell a story of destruction. Palestinians have been able to tell this destruction, but Algerian, I think, have, in a way, it's even hard when I have discussion in Algeria. Some are like, why are you actually interested in this history? Like, you know, it's not that interesting. But they don't see the connection between the destruction of a historical identity, very much anchored in the mountains, in elsewhere, and the consequences of how Algeria is today. And that's something that struck me very much, is also the reluctance to talk about this history in Algeria. The desire to know about it, but also for some of them, the reluctance, even in the young generation, who really want to move on. So it's like also this ambiguity, you know, this feeling of unease, this feeling of why excavating the past, why, like, let's look at the future, without, you know, necessarily seeing that. One day there was this Algerian young man who told me that he loved the film because for him I was doing an emotional genealogy. And he's like, if we don't understand the genealogy of our emotion, of our feeling of unease today, we won't be able to move on. And I think that was key. I understood everything. When you have these feelings, you're inheriting these feelings, you can't put names, you don't even understand where they come from. And you go through your genealogy and you understand this forced exile, and you know, you're inheriting all of these feelings and emotions.
This, sorry, this last point makes me think about the moment of the film where you ask the question of why did nobody rebuild? No, there is one moment when I think it comes out like really naturally, like how come this was happening and nobody fought back or something, and your father, there is a bit, there is no answer to that, right?
I think it's good that it come across as natural, but at this point it was more provocative, because I could see that my father was going in a direction that was not very willing to tell the complexity of the history. You know, it's a way to protect himself. You know, and even today, sometimes when he tells the story, he's really telling a story of unity and resistance and beauty and. And I'm like, yeah, but if you go back to what happened, and so it's hard, you know, you really want to beautify the past and remember it in a beautiful way. But yeah, actually the resistance happened. I found out later while screening the films, but it was really taking a risk, you know. You could be shot if you would be resisting, because it would mean you were with the rebellion and you had something to hide and you were resisting the authority. So it was a very costly act of resistance, but it happened. Yes.
We have a question from Soraya. I will read it in Castellano, and please, Sarah, could you translate it to Myriam? En Colombia, el conflicto armado y la violencia políticos produjo el desplazamiento forzado interno de más de 5 millones de personas. En medio de la pandemia por el CV, las víctimas son una franja de la población más vulnerable. ¿Cómo visibilizar para sensibilizar sobre la situación que enfrentaron ayer y hoy las víctimas, que la sociedad las acompañe en sus reclamos por sus derechos a la verdad, justicia, reparación y garantías de no repetición?
Wow. That's a great question. I think I believe in the power of storytelling. I believe in the power of putting words on trauma, and how it helps by, you know, writing whatever the means you have. If you're a lawyer, if you're an artist, if you're a journalist, if you're just a healer, if you know, it's I think we all have an incremental role, parts in this process, and I very much believe in the power of words to as part of reparation and reconciliation. So that would be my answer, because this is what I did, but it's also because it's, I guess, part of the way I express myself. I don't know what is your job, or what are your skills or interests, but I think we can believe in truth and reconciliation committees. We can believe in films. We can believe in any way truth can come out. I would say through love and respect. I think that's the most important part. Otherwise, you're just adding, I think, hate or trauma, or so it's also how the process itself is carried out that really matters. So the ethics with which you're carrying it out. So that would be my answer to this wonderful and important question.
I think that Carlos would like to join us, right, Carlos? To ask, and Carlos. Yes. Yes, here. Carlos, we don't see you. Sí, ahora. Adelante, por favor. Carlos.
Bueno, a mí me interesa mucho saber la opinión que comentabas antes de los jóvenes. También sale en el documental. ¿Por qué ocurre esto? ¿Por qué tú crees, como joven cineasta además, por qué los jóvenes no se interesan por el pasado? ¿Se oye? ¿No se oye?
Why do we look at the past? Yes, yes, I can. But I couldn't understand very well the question. Sorry about that.
Why the young people now, the young generation, is not interested in history?
Is not interested? Yeah, I think we can't say that the young generation as a whole is not interested in the history, but I met I don't know, in Algeria or in France, I think you know, like I think denial is very strong, and because I think like seeking the truth in the past is a very uncomfortable process. And sometimes you just don't want to open, you know, like uneasy questions that will emotionally move you and make you in a way disturbed. And you just want to consider the present and the future without really seeing how, you know, looking at the past and knowing the truth about the past help build better foundations and for the present. And you know, like in France, I actually have a conversation with my generation, and sometimes I had even like little fights because in the French language, for example, we have many expressions that comes back from the colonial period that are very full of despise for the Arabs, for example, and when you try to shed lights on the genealogy, on the history of this expression, some are reluctant, like they are like, why you're trying to purify the language? I'm like, no, I'm just trying to make you understand that we carry a weight even in our language, in our body, in our unconscious, and that we need to deal with that. And once you have this conversation and people understand your perspective and understand the meaning of the words they are using, like for example, we have an expression in French which is called "du travail d'arabe," which is like very badly done work. Du travail d'arabe is like Arab work, and yes, so that comes from a certain historical context setting, and we live today together in the same society, and you can't use this expression you know, without actually creating a feeling of discomfort in the other person who might have a connection to this part of the world. So I think it's really about appeasing our present today, how we live together and how we relate to each other and how we know each other's history and perspective, and to actually emancipate ourselves at the end from it. But I don't think you can emancipate yourself from history without actually first looking at it. So yeah, I don't know if I answered the question.
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you very much, Myriam.
Welcome, Ahmed.
Yeah, for the questions. And now I think we have only 6 minutes. If anyone from the audience wants to ask the last question. No, I have one last question.
Yeah. Okay, perfect.
Yeah. In which context did you screen the film in Algeria? In the cinema or television or?
Not television. It was an independent film festival in Béjaïa, in Kabylia. So it was very much an honor because they they screened the film at the beginning of the film festival, at the opening. And actually in the audience, you had a long of young people who were actually, they were annoyed with the idea that the festival would start with the film again on the revolution, on the glorious revolution. And at the end of the screening of the film, many came to me and actually told me they understood very well, because they were touched by the intimacy, by the emotion, and they could relate to that. And in the struggle that they are carrying out against, you know, corruption, dictatorship, and the absence of rule of law, and the desire to know the past, the history, and reclaim it in their own way, they could really see the value of this kind of film, this kind of narrative. So that was a very beautiful experience. I was actually with my father, who could speak his language again in front of an audience, so Tamazight. So that was very moving for him. And also screened the film in the village to the villagers, to the witnesses.
In Mansoura?
In Mansoura, yes. And then I screened the film at the French Institute in Algiers. So that was also an interesting setting. And I was going to screen it in Tindouf, Western Sahara, but because of this virus, we couldn't make it, but hopefully in October. And every time it's an opportunity for me to record new testimonies and understand better the perspective of the young and the old generation. And so yeah, it's an ongoing story, actually. Yes.
Thank you for telling it.
Thank you so much for inviting me.
Thank you, Azza, very much for joining us. And I think, Carlos, would you like to say the last word?
Bueno, pues vamos.
Yes, Carlos.
Bueno, pues vamos a cerrar el día de hoy. Yo me quedo con algunas cosas del documental. Hay una que me ha llamado mucho la atención, y es que 58 años después de la guerra todavía se sueña con ella. Creo que es muy fuerte eso, esa frase. 50 años después de un conflicto todavía vengan pesadillas sobre ese conflicto. Hay otra cosa que me ha encantado del final.
Yes. I think that's what is actually reactualizing the past, you know, that make the past forever present when we actually don't deal with it through these nightmares. It manifests itself, but in also many other ways. And I think that unfortunately the rise of the far right in France and the hate speech against part of a population that is associated with the colonial history is very much linked to the fact that we haven't enough, you know, talked about this past and excavated these memories, and hopefully my film and other films, many people in my generation are actually really decided to work on this past, and in this way I'm hopeful, and I don't feel isolated anymore, and I think we're a group now, and solidarity will help us. Yes.
Carlos, ¿quieres decir algo para cerrar? Te falta un minuto. Carlos.
Sí.
Sí, digo que falta un minuto. Si quieres decir algo para cerrar.
Sí.
Sí.
Bueno, y otra cosa que también de la película con la cual me gustaría cerrar, me ha encantado también cuando dice, hay muchas causas injustas en este mundo, pero faltan espíritus libres para defenderlas. Bueno, creo que la gente como vosotras que hace cine social y que de alguna manera cuenta historias, son esa gente que hace falta para transformar este mundo.
Thank you. Thank you for your words. And
Yo creo que estás esperando la traducción, ¿verdad?
no, I got it.
Ah.
Yes, I got it. Thank you so much, Carlos. And I think that all of you present have the same spirit. So we just need to continue fighting. And thank you, all of you, for being there, for asking all these wonderful questions, and for being so receptive and sensitive to the film.
Thank you very much for joining us, everyone, and the audience, which we don't see. Thank you very much for hearing us, and let's continue with the screenings of the films. We'll have the open screening until 8th May.
Yes.
And tomorrow also we have another Q&A at 6 o'clock with another filmmaker. And we always publish the news about the films and about the chat, and the link about the chat in our Facebook, in KCD Facebook, and in Caravan, Between Women Filmmaker Caravan. Thank you very much, and congratulations for finishing the film and for screening it. We are very happy.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank
Take
you.
care, all of you.
Ciao.
Bye.
Stay safe. Goodbye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.